Go better. Blow. Go better.
What the fuck is you doing? We bake shit. Don't send a hit guarantee we face down.
A wild ending to a horrific chain of events. Brooklyn Center police responded to a man waving a gun and ended up exchanging gunfire with him.
This is 23-year-old Eddie Darren Duncan, a Minneapolis man who was released from jail, then killed two of his own cousins inside a family home before opening fire on police less than an hour later. Just after 4:30 p.m. on February 23, 2026, frantic 911 calls led police to a house on the 4200 block of Irving Avenue North in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where officers found 23-year-old Kwame Stewart and 14-year-old Xavier Barnett shot to death inside the home. Just hours earlier, Eddie had walked out of the Hennepin County Jail after posting $35,000 bail. In the days before his release, he had flooded Facebook with dozens of disturbing posts, accusing relatives of mocking him, claiming he had not slept for days, and saying things that made it clear something was seriously wrong. As investigators began piecing together what happened inside that house, they quickly realized the violence did not stop there. About 30 minutes later, the same suspect was found in Brooklyn Center, still armed, where he fired at officers and hit a marked squad car before police shot and killed him. But to understand how a man who had just been released from jail ended up killing two members of his own family in a single afternoon, we have to go back to the very beginning. This is the story of Eddie Darren Duncan. Eddie Darren Duncan was born on April 1, 2002, and grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was 23 years old by the time his name began appearing in court records, police updates, and social media discussions across the city. Much of his life took place in North Minneapolis, where many of his relatives also lived. He spent time around the same cousins, older family members, and familiar neighborhood spaces that shaped his daily routine. Before the case that later led to his arrest, his name was not widely connected to serious violent offenses. Social media became a major part of how he presented himself. Eddie was active on Facebook, where he shared his thoughts, argued with others, and expressed what was bothering him. He often used the name Ebka and posted videos of himself speaking directly to the camera. Sometimes he sounded calm, other times confrontational, but most of the time he made it clear he wanted attention. His posts showed a mix of emotions. At times he bragged, other times he sounded angry, restless, or suspicious of people around him. Some messages felt like they were directed at a wide audience, while others seemed aimed at specific people in his life, especially family members. And that was where another part of his identity started to take shape. Eddie also tried to present himself as a rapper. He shared short drill-style rap clips online, using social media as his main platform. He was not part of a mainstream music career and had no known label backing him, but that did not stop him from taking that image seriously. To him, that online persona mattered. It allowed him to project confidence and control. His posts followed a pattern seen in similar content: strong language, threats, and an effort to appear someone others should not challenge. Over time, his social media became the main space where he built and reinforced that identity. As more of his posts became public, they also showed something more personal. In some messages, Eddie admitted that he struggled with reading. He wrote as if people around him were talking about him, disrespecting him, or setting him up to feel small. Some of those messages were aimed generally at family. In those posts, he didn't just sound angry, he sounded like someone who felt humiliated, watched, and deeply bothered by what he believed people were doing to him. That part of his online activity stood out because it kept returning. He didn't mention it once and move on. He came back to it again and again. He wrote about not trusting family. He said certain people had been hurting him. He suggested that relatives had mocked him and made life harder for him. He also posted messages that made it sound like he believed people around him were against him in a serious way. But then something changed. His online behavior started to shift. It no longer looked like simple frustration. In several posts and videos, Eddie began saying that he was God, challenging people to confront him and speaking as if no one could stop him. At other moments, he returned to talking about betrayal and being mocked. The tone moved between confidence, anger, and confusion. That shift became more serious once his legal trouble began. In May of 2025, Eddie was involved in an incident that pushed him into the criminal justice system. Police in Robbinsdale attempted to stop him for speeding and running a red light. He initially pulled over, but instead of staying, he drove off. The stop turned into a high-speed chase, reaching close to 90 miles per hour before he crashed and ran from the scene. That moment changed everything. Inside the vehicle, officers recovered his phone along with a Glock handgun fitted with an auto-sear and an extended magazine. The presence of that weapon made the case more serious than just fleeing from police. But Eddie was not arrested right away. The case remained active, and prosecutors later filed charges. In January 2026, he was indicted in connection with the chase and the firearm. His name was now tied to an active criminal case. And that was when the situation became public.
Come get them. They are trying to get the God in Minneapolis. Come get them.
By early February 2026, a wanted poster with Eddie's face began circulating online. His name and image were now being shared as law enforcement searched for him. Most people would try to avoid attention in that situation, but Eddie did the opposite. He reposted his own wanted image on his own Facebook page and mocked it. Instead of staying quiet, he leaned into the attention, using it as part of his online image. And that's when the situation escalated. On February 15, 2026, Eddie's online activity became much more intense. Over the course of that day, he made an unusually large number of Facebook posts, repeatedly sharing his own wanted image along with other messages that drew attention to his page.
Niggas are straight goofy. I'm at crib in all black. Goes out. Get with me.
But it wasn't just the volume that stood out. It was the content of what he was posting. Throughout that day, Eddie wrote about distrust towards his family, saying they had hurt him and mocked him for struggling to read. His posts showed growing tension, with some messages sounding like frustration, while others carried a more serious and confrontational tone. He also posted videos where he spoke directly into the camera. In those clips, he appeared restless, jumping quickly between ideas and challenging others to confront him. At times, he argued with viewers during live streams. He repeatedly claimed that he was God, said no one could stop him, and mentioned that he had not slept for several days. That combination of lack of sleep, anger, and suspicion was now visible in public.
An extended magazine was also found with 29 rounds, and there was one in the chamber. After Duncan was finally charged and a warrant was issued for his arrest earlier this month, his Facebook page shows a post where he hasn't slept in 4 days. Then on February 15th, he appeared to be up all night, posting minute to minute.
At the same time, records showed that he had been ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation, indicating that concerns about his mental condition were already present. But those warning signs didn't stop the legal process from moving forward. Later that same day, on February 15th, law enforcement located Eddie and arrested him on the warrant tied to the May 2025 Robbinsdale case. After all the posts, the live videos, and the online taunting, the social media activity finally ended because he was taken into custody. He was booked into the Hennepin County Jail. At that point, the May 2025 incident was no longer just something hanging over him in the background. He was now physically inside the jail system, facing the consequences of the chase and the gun case. Prosecutors viewed him as a public safety concern and moved to keep the case serious in court. But that was not the end of the process.
Because after his arrest, the issue of bail came next. Prosecutors asked for a high amount, pointing to the seriousness of the earlier incident and the concern about public safety. The court approved bail at $70,000 or $35,000 with conditions. That meant Eddie had a path back out if the lower amount was posted under the court's rules. And eventually, that is exactly what happened. On the afternoon of February 23, 2026, everything changed. That day, Eddie Darren Duncan posted $35,000 bail and was released from the Hennepin County Jail. The system had processed the earlier charges, the court had set the bail terms, the money was posted, and by that afternoon, he was no longer behind bars. That was the moment everything moved into a different phase. He walked out of jail and went back into the city as a free man while still waiting for the next steps in the case tied to the May 2025 police chase. The wanted poster, the repeated Facebook posts, the public taunting, the online accusations, the anger toward family, the concerns about his mental state, the pending evaluation, the jail stay, and the bail hearing had all led to that one point. He was out. But then something changed. Within hours of his release, everything was heading towards something much worse. From jail, Eddie went to a house on the 4200 block of Irving Avenue North in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where several of his relatives were inside. This was not a random place to him. It was a family home, a place connected to the same relatives he had been talking about online in the days before. Inside the house, family members were gathered together. A grandmother was there, along with children and other relatives. It was still daytime. People were inside the home going about a normal afternoon, not expecting any kind of violence. When Eddie arrived, he walked into a house full of people who knew him. At first, nothing from the outside made it look like the day was about to turn into something deadly. He had just gotten out of jail. He had gone back to a familiar place. He was around family. But then something changed. Once he was inside, Eddie did not settle in or sit down for a normal visit. He moved through the house with focus. There were several people there, but his attention was not on everyone in the room. He directed himself toward two of his cousins in particular, 23-year-old Aquami Stewart and 14-year-old Xavier Barnett. The distance between everyone in the house was close. This was not a large public setting where people were spread far apart. These were relatives inside the same home, close enough to hear movement, voices, and anything that might suddenly go wrong. And that's when the situation escalated. At some point inside the house, Eddie pulled out a handgun. The moment happened fast. There was no long delay between him closing distance and the shooting starting. Once the gun was out, the danger inside that house became immediate. He fired at Aquami Stewart first. The shot hit him inside the home with family members still nearby. Then Eddie turned the gun towards Xavier Barnett, who was only 14 years old, and fired again. The gunshots rang through the house in quick succession. But that was only the beginning. The sound of the shots sent people inside the home into panic. Family members reacted immediately. Some rushed toward the victims, others moved to protect the children who were still inside. The whole thing happened within seconds, inside a house that had been full of relatives only moments earlier. Aquami and Xavier fell from the gunfire inside the same family home where everyone had been gathered. The children and adults inside did not have time to stop it before it happened. By the time people understood what was going on, both cousins had already been shot. After shooting both cousins, Eddie did not stay there and wait. He moved out of the house and left the scene, while the people still inside were left with the immediate aftermath of the gunfire and the two victims lying wounded inside the home. Meanwhile, 911 calls started pouring in, and officers were sent to the address on Irving Avenue North. As the calls continued coming in, the urgency of the situation became clear. People inside the home stayed near the victims, trying to keep them responsive while waiting for police and medical responders to arrive. But it was too late. Aquami and Xavier were already gone. And while the loss of two lives, the danger of having Eddie running awry, as officers worked inside the home, information began to move quickly. The suspect had already left the scene. That meant the situation was no longer contained to just one location. It was still active. And that's when the situation escalated.
The suspected shooter was then shot and killed just a couple miles away in Brooklyn Center. That's where we find Fox 9's Karen Scullen now, near the Brookdale Shopping Center where gunshots were exchanged yesterday, Karen.
About 25 to 30 minutes after the shooting, another call came in. This time it was from Brooklyn Center, a nearby area. Someone reported a man with a gun in a business parking lot near the 5600 block area.
Police say he went to his cousin's house about 3 hours later and fired those fatal shots, many finding it hard to understand a 14-year-old suddenly gone.
Officers in that area responded to the call. When they arrived, they saw Eddie Darren Duncan. He was still armed with the same handgun. The distance between him and the officers closed quickly. Commands were given, officers moved into position. But then, something changed. As officers approached, Eddie raised the weapon and fired. The shots struck a marked police vehicle, hitting the squad car as officers took cover. And within seconds, everything shifted again. Officers returned fire. The exchange happened fast, with both sides firing in the parking lot. Eddie moved a short distance during the exchange, but he did not get far. He collapsed on the ground. Officers moved in carefully, secured the weapon, and began giving medical aid. Paramedics were called in and took over as soon as they arrived. Eddie was transported to the hospital, but the injuries were severe.
But he crawled out of it and then ran from the scene and wasn't found. Inside his car, though, police pulled out a Glock with an auto-sear that makes it fire like a machine gun.
Back at the house on Irving Avenue North, the scene remained active. Officers continued working inside the home where the earlier shooting had taken place. The same day had now connected two separate scenes within less than an hour. And by the time everything was accounted for, 3 people from the same extended family were gone within that same afternoon. After the devastating tragedy, information about the incident started spreading quickly across Minneapolis and nearby areas. Local news stations began reporting that 2 relatives had been shot inside a home in North Minneapolis, and that the same suspect was later involved in a shooting with police in Brooklyn Center. As more details came out, family members began sharing their side of the story. They spoke about both victims, not just as names in a report, but as brothers who had grown up together and stayed close throughout their lives. Their sister talked about the shock of losing both of them in the same day. She explained that they were always around, always part of family gatherings, and that the home on Irving Avenue had always been a place where relatives came together. As the days passed, the family began dealing with what came next. They created a GoFundMe to help cover the funeral expenses for Xavier and Akwame. The fundraiser began circulating online as relatives, friends, and members of the community shared the link and offered support in any way they could. At the same time, another detail became part of the case. Eddie had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition that can affect how a person understands reality and responds to fear or suspicion. In the days before the shooting, his behavior online showed signs that something was not stable, and that became part of the larger conversation surrounding what happened. And within just a few hours, everything had changed for the same family. They were left mourning multiple losses in a single afternoon, all connected to that one moment inside that house on Irving Avenue North. What happened did not just end that day. It left behind questions about warning signs, decision-making, and how quickly a situation can... Because what makes this story especially difficult to process is not just what happened, but how many signs were already there before it did. When people look back on cases like this, there's often a moment of realization that the outcome, as sudden and shocking as it feels, didn't come out of nowhere. It built up, piece by piece, post by post, decision by decision. The warning signs were visible. They were in the repeated social media posts, the anger, the paranoia, the feeling of being targeted by family. They were in the lack of sleep, the rapid shifts in behavior, the statements that no longer followed normal logic. They were in the legal history, the possession of a dangerous weapon, and the fact that a psychological evaluation had already been ordered. Each of those signs on their own might not have seemed enough to predict something this extreme, but together they painted a much clearer picture. And this is where decision-making becomes critical. Because in situations like this, outcomes are rarely shaped by a single moment. They are shaped by a chain of decisions made by different people at different points in time, by individuals, by families, and by systems. What happens when someone shows clear signs of mental instability but still has access to weapons? What happens when someone expresses fear and distrust for the very people they later come into contact with? What happens when intervention comes late or not at all? Those questions don't just apply to this case, they apply to many others like it. And the reality is, escalation doesn't always look dramatic at first. It often starts quietly. A post that feels off, a message that seems overly aggressive, a behavior that people notice but don't act on, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore, and by then, the window to prevent something worse may already be closing. Not because of one single trigger, but because of a buildup that had been developing over days, weeks, possibly even longer. And that's the part that stays with people. Not just the violence itself, but the realization of how quickly a situation can move from unstable. What do you think about it? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.